the misty streets of Prague's old quarter, a young American art student stumbles upon a forgotten doll shop. Drawn to a porcelain doll in a blue dress, she ignores the warnings of an old shopkeeper and takes it home. What begins as curiosity soon unravels into terror, as the legend of a 19th century dollmaker who trapped children's souls in his creations returns to life. Each night, whispers grow louder, shadows deepen, and the line between wood and flesh begins to blur until the curse demands a new vessel. Prague at night seemed like a city painted in mist and memory. The air was thick with a cold fog that rolled off the Vltava river, swallowing the cobblestone alleys of Malá Strana. Gas lamps glowed faintly behind glass, smudged with centuries of smoke, casting pools of yellow light that seemed too weak to hold back the darkness. Every footstep echoed sharply on the stones, as though someone unseen walked just behind. The statues on the Charles Bridge weathered saints whose faces had eroded into hollow stare stood as silent witnesses to the city's secrets. Emily Carter pulled her scarf tighter against the chill. At 22, she had come to Prague on a semester abroad, chasing art, history, and perhaps a little of the old world magic she had only seen in books. She rented a small room above a cafe not far from Malá Strana, where the ancient streets narrowed like veins through the heart of the city. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered. The city seemed alive in its silence, whispering through the creak of shutters and the distant toll of midnight bells. Her boots clicked softly against the stones as she turned down an alley she didn't recognize. There, wedged between two shuttered antique shops, she saw it, a doll shop. The sign above the door had faded so badly she could barely make out the lettering. Its windows were coated in dust, but inside, faint lamplight flickered. The door gave a long, aching groan when she pushed it open. The air that met her was heavy and strange, carrying the scent of burned wood and melted beeswax. Shadows stretched long across shelves lined with dolls, upon rows of painted faces staring blankly ahead. Her breath caught when she noticed one figure on the middle shelf, a doll in a blue dress, finer than the others, with hair the color of autumn leaves and porcelain skin pale as candle wax. Its glass eyes gleamed unnaturally in the dim light, reflecting a cold spark as though it were watching her. Emily felt something stir in her chest, not quite fear, something heavier, like a string being pulled. She stepped closer. The doll's gaze seemed to follow, its eyes holding her so intently she forgot to breathe. A floorboard creaked behind the counter. She startled, but when she looked, no one was there. Only the faint smell of smoke, lingering as though someone had stoked a fire long ago. For a moment, the shop felt utterly silent. Then, from somewhere deep inside the shelves, she thought she heard it, a faint tapping sound, like small wooden fingers against glass. Emily shook herself, forcing a nervous laugh. It was only a shop, only dolls, and yet she couldn't look away from the one in the blue dress. The bell above the shop door jingled softly, though Emily hadn't seen anyone else enter. She turned and nearly collided with an elderly man who had appeared behind the counter as if he had been there all along. His back was bent, his grey beard tangled, and his eyes sharp. Glassy eyes seemed older than his body. "You should not look at that one for too long," he said in accented English, his voice a rasp like paper tearing. Emily blinked. "The doll," she gave a nervous smile. "It's beautiful, almost too real." The old man's gaze shifted toward the figure in the blue dress. His mouth pulled into a grim line. "That doll carries a curse. So do all of his creations. Whose? Emily asked, curiosity pricking at her fear. The man leaned forward, resting his weight on the counter as though the telling itself was a burden. Jakub Novak, a doormaker, end of the 19th century. He was a genius. His dolls were unlike anything Prague had ever seen. But then his family, they died in fire. Tragic. Some say an accident, others say punishment. Emily felt her skin prickle. Punishment for what? The man's voice dropped. For what he did afterward. Neighbors claimed they heard children's voices in his workshop at night, long after his family was gone, and his dolls' people swore they breathed. Some even claimed they heard the faint sound of lungs inside them. Emily laughed softly, though it came out too thin, betraying unease. That's just folklore, right? But the man did not laugh. He reached beneath the counter and pulled out a yellowed scrap of paper, sliding it toward her. The ink had faded, but she could still read the words scrawled across it. Every doll holds a soul. Whoever owns it will one day be replaced. Emily frowned, the words sinking like stones into her chest. Replaced. Jakub made a bargain with something darker than grief, the old man said. The children who vanished in Prague during those years, they were said to have been taken by him, their souls poured into his dolls. It was the only way he could keep them from being forgotten, or so he claimed. The shop seemed colder now, the air pressing against Emily's lungs. She looked again at the doll in the blue dress. Its glass eyes shimmered faintly in the lamplight, almost as if it had heard every word. Emily forced a smile, though her voice trembled. It's just a story, a creepy one, sure, but still just a story. And yet, when she reached into her bag and took out her wallet, her fingers seemed to move without her will. She handed over a few banknotes. The old man stared at her, as though pity had already claimed his expression. You shouldn't, he murmured, but he took the money anyway. Moments later, Emily stepped back into the misty street, the door groaning, shut behind her. In her arms, wrapped carefully in a paper bag, lay the doll in the blue dress. Its weight felt strange heavier than it should have been. For the briefest moment, she thought she saw its glassy eyes flicker open against the darkness of the street. Emily carried the doll back to her rented room above the cafe. The streets were nearly empty, and Prague's fog clung to her hair and clothes as she climbed the narrow staircase. Inside, the warmth of the radiator did little to chase away the unease that had followed her from the shop. She set the doll carefully on her desk, still wrapped in its paper. Hours later, she fell asleep. The first night passed in silence until a sound woke her, a soft knock at her door, then another, steady, patient, always at the same rhythm. Emily squinted at the alarm clock by her bed. The hands pointed to 3 a.m. Her heart beat faster as she slipped out of bed and crossed the floor. She pressed her ear to the door. The knocking stopped. She turned the handle quickly, pulling the door open. The hallway beyond was empty, lit only by a faint bulb that buzzed against the ceiling. She closed the door, shaking her head. It was nothing, just her imagination, or someone drunk wandering the building. But when she turned back into the room, she froze. The desk was empty, the paper wrapping lay crumpled on the floor. The doll in the blue dress now sat near the window, its head tilted toward the street below, as if it had been watching. Emily swallowed hard. She was certain she had left it on the desk. She walked slowly to the window, lifted the doll, and placed it back where it had been. Her hands trembled. though she told herself she was only tired. She decided not to think about it. But when she passed the mirror above the sink, she stopped cold. For a second, her reflection was wrong. Her own face stared back at her, but the skin was cracked like old wood. Fine splinters ran across her cheeks, splitting the flesh into carved grain, and beside her reflection, as clear as if someone stood in the room, loomed the figure of a man in a carpenter's mask. The mask was chipped, darkened with scorch marks, and 2 hollow eye holes stared through her. Emily gasped and spun around. The room was empty. The mirror showed only her pale face, wide-eyed, untouched. The doll sat silently on the desk, its glass, eyes fixed forward, gleaming faintly in the dim light. The next evening, Emily could not shake the unease that had settled in her room. Every corner seemed to whisper with shadows. She told herself it was nerves, jet lag, or the weight of that disturbing story from the shopkeeper. Yet her eyes always drifted to the doll in the blue dress. Something compelled her to pick it up, to turn it over in her hands, as if searching for a hidden secret. The porcelain face felt too smooth, the eyes too bright. When her fingers brushed along the back seam of the doll, she felt a small opening. Curious, she pressed harder until the stitching gave way with a faint tear. Inside, folded and stiff with age, was a piece of paper. She pulled it free. The parchment was brittle, stained dark in blotches that looked like dried blood in shaky handwriting. Someone had scrawled, "I do not make dolls. I keep their souls so they will never be forgotten." Her stomach tightened. Beneath the words, crude drawings covered the rest of the page. Children with hollow eyes, their mouths sewn shut with thick thread. Little bodies carved into wood, their limbs jointed by nails. Emily's breath hitched. She dropped the paper onto her desk. The room felt colder, the air laced with the faint scent of burned timber. Then she heard it, a low, pitiful whimper, the sound of a child in pain. It came from under her bed. Her legs shook as she lowered herself, peering into the shadows. Darkness pooled beneath the frame, too deep for her small lamp to reach. The crying grew louder. She stretched a trembling hand forward, heart hammering. The instant her fingertips brushed the floorboards, the sound cut off. Silence pressed against her ears. She searched again, but there was nothing beneath the bed. Only emptiness and the faint, acrid stench of charred wood. Emily sat back, clutching her knees to her chest. The doll remained on the desk, watching with unblinking eyes. The blood-stained paper fluttered once, as if stirred by a breath. Sleep offered Emily no escape. When exhaustion finally pulled her under, her dreams were not her own. She found herself standing in a workshop filled with hanging shapes. At first they seemed like wooden marionettes, but as her eyes adjusted, she realized they were children's small bodies suspended by ropes, their skin pale and their eyes glassy. Some were carved into wooden frames, their mouths stitched with coarse thread. The smell of smoke thickened the air. Flames licked at the corners of the room, climbing the walls and consuming the shelves of dolls. The fire grew brighter, yet the faces of the children remained in shadow. From the center of the inferno, a man emerged. His skin was blistered, his hands blackened as if charred. Over his face, he wore a cracked wooden mask, carved with the features of a craftsman. Emily wanted to run, but her body would not move. The man's head tilted, and when he spoke, the voice was not his own. It was dozens of voices at once, overlapping in a chorus of children's whispers and screams. "You will not escape." The fire surged higher. Emily felt heat scorch her skin, The ropes above her snapped one by one, and the children's bodies swung toward her as though reaching for help. She tried to scream, but smoke filled her lungs. The man stepped closer, his hollow eyes locked on hers. He raised a hand, burned and cracked like charcoal, and pointed directly at her. "You will take their place." Emily jolted awake, gasping. Her throat burned as if she had truly inhaled smoke. She pressed her hands against her chest, trying to steady her breath. Then she noticed the smell, a faint, acrid scent of burned cloth. She looked down. The hem of her nightgown was singed, blackened as though touched by fire. The doll sat on her desk, perfectly still in its blue dress, its glass eyes glimmering faintly in the dark. The next morning, Emily left her room determined to seek answers. The burned paper, the dreams, the strange presence, she needed something rational to hold on to. Before fear consumed her completely, she made her way through the mist-veiled streets to the National Library, a vast cathedral of knowledge whose arched ceilings and towering shelves seemed to hold centuries of secrets. Dust motes drifted in the shafts of pale light from the windows, and the silence inside was so deep it felt sacred. Among the rows of worn books, she found Professor Yannick, a folklorist known for his work on Prague's darker legends. His thin frame and sharp spectacles gave him an almost skeletal look, but his eyes burned with curiosity when Emily mentioned the name Jakub Novak. "You have heard of him?" she said cautiously. Yannick nodded. "Everyone in my field has. He was a gifted dollmaker, but his story is one of horror. The police of the time kept records, though most are buried under dust. Families reported children missing. Parents swore their sons and daughters had been lured by Novak with promises of toys. And always, before the child vanished, there was one of his dolls in the home." Emily's hands tightened around the strap of her bag. So it was real, not just folklore. Yannick studied her face carefully. Why this sudden interest? She hesitated, then admitted, "I think I may have one of his dolls." The professor's eyes widened. Without another word, he pulled a heavy folder from the archives and spread brittle pages across the table. Police reports, witness statements, sketches of dolls with uncanny, lifelike features. At the bottom of one page, a single line scrawled in faded ink caught Emily's attention. Jakub vanished into the fire. The workshop burned, but within the flames, witnesses swore they saw his dolls walking. Emily's breath caught. She leaned closer to the paper, the words blurring as a chill crept over her. The library's lights flickered once, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat. When they steadied, Emily could have sworn she heard something faint between the shelves. A child's laughter, high and broken, echoing far too close. She turned sharply, scanning the empty aisles. Nothing moved, yet the smell of scorched wood lingered faintly in the air. Professor Yannick's voice was grave when he spoke again. "If you truly have one of his creations, you must be careful. They are not just wood and glass. They are prisons. For souls, and the prison always hungers for more." Emily said nothing. In her mind, she saw the doll's eyes gleaming in the dim light of her room. Waiting. The address Professor Yannick had given her lead Emily to the edge of Malá Strana, where the cobblestone streets grew narrower and the buildings leaned in close. As if whispering to one another, she found herself standing before a building that looked forgotten by time. The wooden door sagged on rusted hinges, its surface blackened and scarred by old fire. Emily hesitated, clutching her coat tighter, then pushed the door open. The sound echoed through the hollow structure. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with mildew and ash. Broken shelves lined the walls, and the floor was littered with scraps of wood, cracked porcelain, and twisted nails. Her flashlight beam swept across the room and caught on something above her. She looked up. Dolls hung from the ceiling by strings, their heads missing, their eyes gouged out. Some dangled limply like children suspended in a cruel game. The sight sent bile rising in her throat. Then came the whispers, at first faint, like wind through cracks, but growing stronger. Her name, over and over, spoken in the fragile voices of children. Emily. The light in her hand trembled as she turned slowly. The shadows shifted. Something moved between the broken shelves, slipping just beyond her sight. She raised the beam again, sweeping it across the room. The darkness seemed to breathe. Then her flashlight caught them. Dozens of eyes staring at her from the shadows. Glass eyes, glowing faintly in the beam, set in cracked porcelain faces. The dolls were everywhere, their bodies twisted, their expressions frozen in half-formed smiles. Emily stumbled backward, her heart slamming against her ribs. The whispers rose into a chorus, a cacophony of small voices filling the workshop with unbearable sound. She dropped the light for a moment, and when she scrambled to pick it up again, the dolls had shifted closer. They stood where they had not been before, their blank faces turned toward her, their glass eyes gleaming like cold stars. Emily backed toward the exit, every instinct screaming at her to run. But even as she reached for the door, she felt it something. Behind her, watching, waiting, as if the workshop itself was alive and hungry. Emily stumbled deeper into the workshop, clutching her flashlight like a weapon. The beam jittered across warped walls and splintered beams. Everywhere she turned, more dolls appeared, their porcelain faces fractured, their small hands dangling at their sides. On a workbench near the back of the room sat the doll in the blue dress. Emily froze. She had left it in her room, locked away, yet here it was, perched neatly on the scarred wood as though it had been waiting. Its eyes blinked. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The glass lids fluttered once, then again, slow and deliberate. The doll's lips parted, and though no sound came at first, she saw the faintest tremor of movement. The air thickened. A sudden force yanked her hair, pulling her forward. She screamed, stumbling as invisible hands dragged her across the floor. The flashlight slipped from her grip and rolled into the darkness, leaving only the faintest glow to outline the horror around her. From the blackened corner of the room, a figure emerged. Jakub Novak. His body was charred, his hands scorched and twisted, yet he moved with dreadful purpose. The cracked wooden mask he wore was etched with burns, its hollow eyeholes fixed upon her. Emily tried to crawl backward, but the force held her in place. Jakub bent close, his breath hot and foul against her skin. His voice came in a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "I have waited so long for a new vessel." His burned fingers brushed her cheek. The sensation was both fire and ice, searing into her flesh. She felt her own body weaken, her heartbeat faltering under the pressure of his presence. The dolls around the room began to tremble, their glass eyes glowing faintly. One by one, their mouths cracked open. From within came voices, high-pitched and layered, the cries of children bound within their wooden prisons. Jakub's mask tilted as he spoke again, his whisper a promise. "You will be perfect, beautiful forever." Emily's scream tore through the workshop, but the dolls only echoed it, their tiny mouths twisting in mockery of her terror. Emily's body trembled as she fought against the unseen force holding her in place. The doll in the blue dress sat, motionless on the bench, but its eyes glowed faintly with a life of their own. The workshop pulsed with whispers, the overlapping cries of children echoing from every wall. Desperate, Emily lunged toward the doll. Her fingers closed around it, and with all her strength, she hurled it against the floor. Porcelain shattered into dozens of pieces. For a heartbeat, she thought it was over. Then she looked back at the workbench. The doll was there again, whole and perfect, its head tilted slightly as if mocking her. Emily's scream tore through the air. She grabbed a hammer from the bench and brought it down with savage force. The doll's body cracked under the blow, splintering apart. Yet, as soon as the fragments touched the ground, they reformed, the doll reappearing in pristine condition. Seated upright, with its blue dress unruffled, the walls began to bleed. Thick streaks of crimson oozed between the wooden beams, dripping down until the floor was slick with it. From above, the headless dolls swayed like bodies on nooses, their porcelain stumps groaning under invisible weight. Jakub appeared again, stepping from the shadows. His burned hands carried a carving knife, the blade dulled and blackened with soot. He lifted Emily's arm and dragged the knife across her skin in one swift motion. Blood welled up and ran freely down her wrist. Emily cried out, struggling against him, but the workshop itself seemed to hold her captive. The blood spilled onto the doll in the blue dress, its porcelain face shuddering as if gasping for breath. The children's voices rose in a shrill chorus. Their cries became a chant, unintelligible words twisting into a single demand. More, more, more. Emily's blood seeped into the doll's cracked lips. Its tiny chest rose and fell once, as though it were alive. Its glass eyes rolled back, then snapped forward, gleaming with hunger. Jakub leaned close, his burned mask inches from her face. His voice was low, almost tender. "You are becoming what they are. You will belong to me." The workshop shook as if the building itself recognized the ritual. The floorboards groaned. The air thickened with the scent of ash and iron. The dolls on the ceiling thrashed violently, their strings snapping, bodies falling around her in a rain of porcelain and wood. Emily screamed again, her voice drowned in the chorus of crying children. Emily staggered toward the door, her blood leaving a crimson trail across the warped floorboards. She pulled at the handle with all her strength, but it would not budge. The wood felt alive, pulsing under her hands, as if the workshop itself had locked her inside. Behind her, the dolls moved. They crawled across the floor and scaled the walls, their small limbs bending at unnatural angles. Their glass eyes glowed in the flicker of unseen fire, and their tiny mouths opened and closed, releasing the cries of trapped souls. Emily pressed her shoulder against the door again, but it held firm. She turned just in time to see Jakub emerging from the shadows. His charred figure loomed, the wooden mask splitting across its center as if it too were alive. He raised his burned hand and placed it gently against her cheek. "You will never age, you will never fade," he whispered. "You will be eternal, as they are." The doll in the blue dress sat upon the bench, its porcelain face shining with a strange, wet sheen. It rose unsteadily to its feet, moving with jerks like a puppet cut free from strings. Its glass eyes fixed on Emily as the children's voices swelled into a deafening chorus. Emily's body weakened. Her scream tore through the workshop, but it was cut short as her reflection in the window darkened. For a brief moment, she saw herself, her skin splitting into wooden seams, her mouth stitched shut by invisible hands. The sound ended in silence. Weeks later, the doll shop in Malá Strana opened its doors once again. Tourists wandered in, marveling at the rows of wooden figures dressed in traditional garments. On the highest shelf, newly placed among the others, sat a doll in a flowing blue dress. Its face was carved with impossible precision, the porcelain features so lifelike that visitors swore it resembled a young woman. Its glass eyes sparkled faintly, and if one stared too long, the corners of its mouth seemed to curl into the faintest of smiles. Emily Carter was never seen again.